We begin my top 24 remaining tight end rankings with tight ends that I think are probably low end tight end twos this week. Remember that Thursday night players or people on bye are not included in these rankings, so if you see somebody missing and they played on Thursday or if they're on bye, that's why. We have Juwan Johnson, Noah Gray, and Isaiah Likely. Juwan Johnson in week one against the Panthers scored a touchdown. He's also seen 6 and 4 targets in the past 2 games, and so I think he's going to be utilized in this game against Carolina, and it's a really good matchup for him. Noah Gray has seen 3 and 4 targets in the past 2 weeks. He had 60 yards 2 weeks ago. Tampa Bay is an advantageous matchup for him, and so I think he's going to be utilized heavily. I think they're going to use a lot of 12 personnel, and so I do think that he's a decent floor option this week because the passing volume should be pretty high. Isaiah Likely is playing against Denver this week. He's seen 4 targets in each of the past 3 games. I think that the Ravens are going to try to avoid Pat Surtain at all costs, and so I think they're going to utilize more 12 personnel in this one, and so I do think he sees an increase in targets. Now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end twos. We have Theo Johnson, Taysom Hill, Jonnu Smith, Will Dissly, and Noah Fant. Theo Johnson has seen his snap count rise. He saw 97% of the snaps in this past game. I think he's going to get a little bit extra involvement despite it being a tough matchup. I think the Giants are going to have to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game against Washington. And so I do think he presents a decent amount of upside in this one. Then we have Taysom Hill. He is old and he's missed some time, but when he has played, he's utilized as a tight end, quarterback, and running back. And so I do think that he is a very high upside play. And I think he does get an extra layer of floor added to him because of his rushing attempts. And so I do think he's a pretty solid, sneaky play this week. Then we have Jonnu Smith against Buffalo. He's seen at least 6 targets in each of the past 3 games. And while he did come back down to earth a little bit this past week, I do think he's a strong play against Buffalo. It is a good matchup for him. And until we see him have a decreased level of involvement in this offense, I do think that he's going to be a relatively high floor player. I just don't think the ceiling is going to be there for him on a week to week basis. Will Dissly is playing against Cleveland. He's seen 11 and 7 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. And so I do think that he's a very high volume candidate if he does play this week. However, it is not a good matchup against Cleveland. And so I don't think he's going to be seeing 11 targets again, but I do think that he's going to be involved. And so I think he's a pretty high floor player as well. Then we have Noah Fant. He's seen 6, 4, and 4 targets in each of the past 3 weeks. It's a plus matchup against the Rams. I think the Seahawks are going to have to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game against the Rams. And so for that reason, I do think he presents us with a good amount of upside. Also, in 2 of the past 3 games, he's had at least 60 receiving yards. And so I do think that he provides us with a pretty good floor. And if he were to happen to get a touchdown, he'd present you with a very good amount of upside for somebody that's not an elite option for us at tight end. If you like what you're hearing and seeing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. I do these rankings videos each and every single week, so make sure you check out my quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings as they come out. And make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks. Now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to high end tight end twos this week. We have Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet, Tucker Kraft, and TJ Hawkinson. Hunter Henry, this projection is with Drake May missing this week. For that reason, I don't think he's going to be quite as efficient with his targets, but I do think he's going to see a solid amount of targets regardless. And so I do think he's a high floor candidate. I just don't think we have a ceiling week from him. Cole Kmet is playing against Arizona this week. He's had 2 massive games this year, then a couple duds. I do think with him not being involved really in this past game, they're going to attempt to get him more involved. And so I do think he presents us with a little bit more upside, and I do have him scoring a touchdown in this game. Tucker Kraft is playing against Detroit. It isn't a great matchup, but I do think they're going to have to pass the ball extensively to stay in this one. And he's been hyper efficient, and I think he's going to continue to be pretty efficient with the targets he's given, and I think is a pretty strong play this week. Then we have TJ Hawkinson against Indianapolis. It's been reported that he's not going to be on a snap count. I'm cautious to rank him too high in these rankings without seeing what his target share is going to look like with Sam Darnold at the helm. And so for that reason, I think this is a reasonably safe projection, given that at least it's been reported that he's going to see a full allotment of snaps in what is a plus matchup against Indianapolis. And so I do think that he's a very risky play this week, but obviously we know he's good, and so he does present us with a ton of upside. And now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end ones this week. We have Zach Ertz, Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, and Jake Ferguson. Zach Ertz saw 11 targets this past week. That's awesome. I don't know if he's going to see 11 this week. It isn't a great matchup either, but I do think he's starting to establish himself as a prominent member of this passing offense. And so I do think he's going to be a pretty good play this week. Then we have Sam Laporta against Green Bay. In the one game this past week in which JMO missed, he saw 6 targets. Before that, we'd been seeing 1 to 2. And so I do think he continues to be targeted with JMO out. It's just kind of scary when he comes back, but for now, I think he's a pretty good play. Then we have Evan Ingram against Philly. In his first game back, he saw 10 targets. Then he's seen 5 in each of the past 2. I don't think against Philadelphia they can afford with Christian Kirk out to not target him. And so I do think he's a pretty good play this week. And I do think he sees a little bit of extra volume with Kirk being out. Then we have Mark Andrews against Denver. After basically being a non-factor and being MIA for weeks on end, the past couple of weeks he's been a very strong play on the back of touchdown scoring. I do think he scores another one against Denver here, and I think the Ravens are going to utilize a lot of 12 personnel against the Broncos, and so I think he's a high upside play this week. Then we have Dalton Kincaid against Miami. He's been seeing a lot of 6 and 7 target games, and really at the tight end position, for the most part, that's about as good as you can ask for. And so for that reason, I do think he's a pretty safe player and that his involvement should be pretty good every week. And I don't have him projected for a touchdown, but I think he sees a high amount of volume in what should be a pretty high scoring game against Miami. Then we have Jake Ferguson against Atlanta. He wasn't very efficient in terms of yardage with his targets this past week. This is a plus matchup. I think he's going to be a lot more efficient this week. And so for that reason, as Dak Prescott's security blanket, I think he's a pretty high upside play this week. And now we have tight ends that I think are realistic candidates to potentially be the tight end 1 overall. We have Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Kate Otten, and Brock Bowers. Kyle Pitts is playing against Dallas. The past 4 weeks, we've seen at least 10 points from him in each week. I think against Dallas, he's going to be involved once again. I don't have him projected for another 2-touchdown game, obviously, but I do think he's going to be used extensively in this offense. And it's not even so much as that he's getting a ludicrous amount of the target share. It's just that the passing volume is so immense that it really does give him a relatively safe floor, at least the past 4 weeks. And so I do think that continues. Then we have David Njoku against the Chargers. It isn't the best matchup, but with Amari Cooper gone, he's seen 7 targets at least in the past 2 games. And so for that reason, I think he's a very high upside play. He's a really good player. And with the Jameis back there just chucking it up, for the playmakers at least, all signs point to them being strong starts each and every single week because Jameis just doesn't care. Then we have Travis Kelce against Tampa Bay. It's a plus matchup. I think they are going to use him and Gray quite a bit in this one. And so I think to stay in this game, they're going to have to pass the ball a lot. And so for that reason, I think he's a high upside play. Then we have Trey McBride against Chicago. He went off against Miami this past week. I think that continues against Chicago. He and Marvin Harrison Jr. are quite the formidable duo. And I really don't think there are many teams that are going to be able to contain both of them. I think he has a pretty good week. Then we have Kate Otten against Kansas City. In the absence of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, he appears to be the centerpiece of the passing offense, him and the running backs at least. And so I think he, in an easy matchup, sees a ton of volume once again and is an incredibly strong play and a definite candidate to be the tight end 1 overall. I don't project 2 touchdowns again, but still. Then we have Brock Bowers against Cincy. This past week was a bit of an off game for him. I think, though, that he continues to see the most volume in general of any tight end. And if last week was generally the worst week we'll see from him, that's pretty good for a tight end. And so I think he returns to being the elite tight end 1 that we know and love. And I think he ends up being the tight end 1 overall this week. And so to conclude, tight ends that I think are probably low end tight end 2s this week, we have Juwan Johnson, Noah Gray, and Isaiah Likely. Tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end 2s are Theo Johnson, Taysom Hill, Jonnu Smith, Will Dissly, and Noah Fant. Tight ends that I think are probably mid to high end tight end 2s are Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet, Tucker Kraft, and TJ Hawkinson. Tight ends that I think are mid to low end tight end ones, but not probably candidates to be the tight end one, are Zach Ertz, Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, and Jake Ferguson. And then tight ends that I think are mid to high end tight end ones with a realistic shot at being the tight end one are Kyle Pitts, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Cade Otton, and Brock Bowers. All right, so you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there somebody that I'm missing from this list entirely? Let me know below in the comment section. Remember that players on bye or if they played on Thursday night are not included in these rankings. So if you see somebody missing and they fit under that criteria, that's the reason why. With that being said, make sure to check out my quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings as they come out. Thanks.